Ever heard of a comedy scene that turned into a near-death experience? It happened to Lucille Ball in 1956 during the Lucy's Italian movie episode of I Love Lucy. The plan was simple: stomp grapes in a huge vat for laughs. What no one expected was that her stomping partner, Teresa Torelli D'Amico, a real Italian grape stomper who didn't speak English, would take things way too literally. They climbed into that vat drenched in real grapes. As the take rolled, Lucy slipped and accidentally knocked Torelli off balance. What followed wasn't staged. Torelli grabbed Lucy by the throat, began choking her, and Lucy felt grapes up my nose, in my ears. I was drowning in these grapes, in her own words. This wasn't sitcom hijinks. It was Lucille struggling to breathe, floored in a vat of smashed grapes, as the live audience laughed, none the wiser. She later said she thought she'd die. The punch in her torso knocked the wind out of her. The choking escalated, and it was only by wrestling free and yelling that she was saved. That's when the crew finally pulled her out. Imagine expecting a comedic gag and nearly drowning mid-scene. The visual of Lucy, red-haired and hysterically fighting for air in the middle of a live audience, hits like a gut punch. It went down in TV history as one of the most dangerous, overlooked scenes. Decades later, Lucille still referred to it as one of her favorites, but she never sugarcoated what it was: terrifying. She described the studio's struggles casting the perfect tomato squasher, and how the language barrier meant no one coached Torelli once the cameras rolled. Lucille Ball was no ordinary actress. She was the backbone of her show, both in front of and behind the camera. But that level of creative control came at a steep emotional cost. On more than one occasion, it all became too much. And one of the most intense moments happened during a clash with director William Asher, a respected force in early television. The tension had been building for days. Asher, known for his fast-paced shooting style, was growing frustrated with Lucy's relentless need for perfection. She'd rework punchlines on the fly, demand retakes long after the crew was ready to move on, and nitpick tiny details, where props were placed, how the lighting hit her face, even the cadence of Desi's lines. What most of the world saw as comedic genius was, behind the scenes, an exhausting whirlwind of control. During one particular episode in the mid-1950s, the conflict reached a breaking point. Lucille had rewritten part of the scene the night before and insisted it be shot her way. Asher pushed back, reminding her of deadlines, budget, and the limits of the studio team. But Lucy wasn't hearing it. Her voice cracked mid-argument, and suddenly, in front of the entire crew, she broke down in tears. She sobbed, shaking, right in Asher's face. According to multiple crew members, the entire set went silent. This wasn't just the star losing it. This was a woman carrying the weight of a billion-dollar franchise, crumbling under the pressure to keep it all perfect. No one laughed, no one moved, and no one dared to comfort her. Asher later recalled the moment, saying, "Lucille was the most professional person I ever worked with, but she also carried more emotional weight than anyone I've ever seen." That breakdown wasn't weakness, it was the dam finally breaking. Lucille wasn't just acting in I Love Lucy. She was also overseeing production decisions, rewriting scripts, and often re-choreographing scenes the night before a shoot. CBS had made her the first female head of a major production studio. She wasn't just America's sweetheart, she was a media empire. But the constant pressure to perform, lead, and innovate, especially in a male-dominated industry, was brutal. Her breakdowns weren't just rare, they were revealing. They showed that even a comedic icon could be shattered by stress. The very perfectionism that made her a legend also left her emotionally drained and perpetually on edge. People expected Lucy Ricardo, the lovable clown. But Lucille Ball was something else entirely. Sharp, driven, and sometimes on the verge of collapse. And perhaps the most ironic part? After the breakdown, Lucy wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and nailed the scene. One take, Classic Lucy. But behind that laugh, there was a woman hanging on by a thread. To the world, Lucille Ball was the queen of comedy. Charming, goofy, endlessly lovable. But ask her co-stars and crew, and they'll tell you. The real Lucille ran her set like a battlefield. Behind the slapstick, she was known for her intense, sometimes ruthless control. Some even called her terrifying. Ball wasn't just the star of I Love Lucy. She co-owned Desilu Productions, making her the boss of everyone from directors to set designers. That level of authority, rare for any actor, especially a woman in the 1950s, meant she made the final call on everything. And when something wasn't right, Lucille didn't wait for a polite sidebar. She erupted. There are stories of her exploding on crew members for the tiniest mistakes. One former lighting tech claimed that a misplaced spotlight once led to Lucille halting the entire taping, marching across the stage and shouting, "If I don't look like a DMN star, none of you have a job." Then there's the infamous eyelash incident. During one dress rehearsal, a makeup artist allegedly trimmed her fake eyelashes unevenly. Lucy flew into a rage, ripped them off herself, and stormed out, leaving a stunned silence behind her. Her co-stars weren't immune either. In fact, she was known to be especially tough on Vivian Vance, who played Ethel. While the two later claimed to be close, there were rumors that Lucille demanded Vivian stay heavier than her to maintain the funny best friend image. Any attempts Vivian made to slim down? Blocked. And then came a most bizarre story of all. Richard Burton, one of Hollywood's most respected dramatic actors, once guest starred on a later Desilu project. After just 2 days on set, he reportedly referred to Lucille as a monster in heels. Why? Because Lucille had corrected him in front of the crew on how to deliver a line. Burton was furious. She didn't care. But these weren't just diva meltdowns. Lucille's control came from necessity. She knew that any crack in her empire would be used against her. Women weren't supposed to be studio bosses. They weren't supposed to give orders or rewrite scripts. So Lucille went the other way. She took no prisoners. In many ways, her behavior was the same kind we'd expect from male directors or studio heads. But because she was a woman, it was often painted as hysterical or cruel. Still, there's no denying the impact it had on those around her. Crew members walked on eggshells. Writers dreaded rewrites. Even Desi Arnaz admitted that when Lucy was mad, even God didn't want to be on set. Yet somehow, all of that pressure translated into genius. Every episode delivered. Every laugh was earned. But the emotional toll of keeping that machine running, it was growing. Lucille Ball didn't just risk her reputation on set. She risked her body. As America's most beloved comedic actress, Lucy was known for throwing herself, quite literally, into every scene. Whether she was falling off furniture, getting drenched, or tumbling across the stage, audiences laughed. But behind the laughs were bruises, scars, and in one case, a head injury so severe it stopped production cold. One of the most intense incidents happened during a water stunt gone wrong. In the episode Lucy's Italian Movie, the same one with the infamous grape vat, there was a follow-up gag involving Lucy falling off a small fishing boat. It wasn't supposed to be dangerous. The script just called for her to tumble into the water. But the production crew misjudged the depth of the platform. Lucy hit her head hard on the edge of the wooden boat. Witnesses say she didn't move right away. The audience went silent. Crew members rushed in, and Desi Arnaz, who had been off stage at the time, came flying in a panic. Lucy was conscious but dazed, bleeding from her forehead. An ambulance was called. The set was shut down for the day. No jokes, no laughter, just fear. She recovered, but the crew never forgot it. That wasn't the first time Lucy had been hurt on set, and it wouldn't be the last. There were burns from stage lighting, twisted ankles from choreographed falls, and even a near electrocution incident during a special effects test for a later Desilu project. According to a crew member on the Lucy show, every time she got up after a stunt, we'd hold our breath. Because if she didn't laugh, We didn't know if she was hurt. Desi, ever the protective husband, began pushing back. He argued with producers, demanding more stunt doubles and tighter safety measures. But Lucy insisted on doing things herself. "They can't laugh if it doesn't look real," she said once, brushing off a bruise on her elbow. That drive for authenticity was admirable, but also dangerous. She never let anyone see how much it hurt. On camera, Lucy Ricardo was a whirlwind, tripping, dancing, slipping, and squealing in joy. But off camera, Lucille Ball was icing her joints, hiding migraines, and pressing on through exhaustion. Her body was breaking down, but the show had to go on. And that mindset took its toll. Years later, stunt coordinators would marvel at how few protections were in place during Lucille's golden era. No padded floors, no harnesses, no rehearsals with doubles. Just Lucy, doing it live, every time because the laugh was worth it. It wasn't until much later in life that she admitted it. She was scared, not of the stunts, but of what would happen if she stopped doing them. She feared the audience would disappear, that her fame would fade. That being real was her only edge. In the 1950s, being labeled a communist in Hollywood could destroy your career overnight. And for a few terrifying days in 1953, Lucille Ball thought her entire life's work was about to be torn apart. Not because of a role she played, but because of a card she signed years earlier, long before she became a household name. It all began when confidential FBI documents were leaked to the press, revealing that Lucille Ball had once registered to vote as a member of the Communist Party back in 1936. Headlines exploded. Lucy arrested? Newspapers couldn't believe it. Fans were stunned, and the timing couldn't have been worse. I Love Lucy was at its absolute peak, pulling in millions of viewers every week. Now, the woman who brought joy to millions was being accused of secretly betraying her country. Inside the studio, panic set in. CBS executives were scrambling. Sponsors were threatening to pull out. There was even talk of canceling future episodes. Desi Arnaz, furious and protective, called a press conference immediately. And that's when things got even more dramatic. Live on air, Desi stood beside Lucy, arm around her shoulder, and addressed the elephant in the room. The only thing red about Lucy is her hair, and even that's not real. The audience roared with laughter. But behind the joke was desperation. Lucille stood there, silent, visibly shaken. She later admitted she was seconds away from fainting. What most people didn't know was that Lucy had signed that card to please her grandfather, a passionate leftist who believed deeply in workers' rights. She never attended a meeting, never donated a dime, and never considered herself political. But none of that mattered to the FBI or to the press. For days, her name appeared alongside suspected subversives and blacklisted writers. Rumors swirled that J. Edgar Hoover himself had taken an interest. The stress pushed Lucille to the edge. According to her makeup artist, she cried backstage between takes, terrified that audiences would turn on her. She thought it was over. She kept saying, "I worked so hard, and for what?" But somehow, the scandal didn't stick. Desi's public defense, combined with Lucy's track record of wholesome entertainment, helped her survive what had crushed so many others. The show stayed on the air. The sponsors returned, and the FBI eventually admitted they had no case. Still, the scars were real. Lucy never talked about it publicly again. But those close to her said she changed after that, became more private, more cautious, and even more controlling. She had faced cancellation at the height of her fame, and it had nearly broken her. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz were television's golden couple, the unstoppable duo behind the most-watched show in America. On screen, they were the perfect pair. Off-screen, their marriage was coming apart at the seams. What fans didn't see, what they weren't supposed to see, was that behind the laughter, Lucille was living in a storm of heartbreak, jealousy, and quiet humiliation. Desi was charming, magnetic, and brilliant. He also had a reputation. Hollywood insiders whispered about his late nights, drinking binges, and rumored affairs. At first, Lucy tried to ignore the talk. Then she tried confronting him. Then she tried working more, thinking that if she kept the spotlight on them as a couple, maybe the cracks wouldn't show. But they did. One night, in particular, shattered her. A gossip column published a blind item about a major television star's husband being caught leaving a Hollywood club with a pair of young blondes. The timing? Just 2 nights before Lucille's birthday. She knew it was Desi. Everyone on the lot knew it. But Lucy still showed up to work, still nailed her lines, still pretended that everything was fine in front of the cameras. Privately, though, she broke down. Crew members say she locked herself in her dressing room for nearly 2 hours before filming. When Desi knocked, she told him to leave. "I'm not Lucy right now," she reportedly shouted. "I'm your wife, and I'm done being embarrassed." But she wasn't done. Not yet. She still believed, desperately, that the marriage could be saved, that maybe the show could hold them together. So they kept filming. Season after season, they smiled, kissed, and laughed on cue. But the rift kept growing. Lucille began showing up to set earlier and staying later. Not because she had more work, but because she didn't want to go home. Desi, meanwhile, sank deeper into alcohol. Their off-camera fights became legend. And the saddest part? Many of them ended with Lucy in tears, asking a question Desi never answered. Why am I not enough? In 1960, she filed for divorce. The press called it shocking. Fans mourned. But those close to Lucille said it was the first time she had truly chosen herself. And still, she was heartbroken. She loved Desi. Always had. He was her first real love, her business partner, the father of her children. But she couldn't keep sacrificing her dignity to protect the illusion of a perfect life. What made the betrayal even worse was that it was public. Every magazine covered it. Every talk show joked about it. The same woman who had brought joy to millions now had her private pain turned into entertainment. Yet even through all of that, Lucille never spoke ill of Desi in interviews. She took the high road, and when he died in 1986, she said, "He was the love of my life. I just couldn't live with him." When the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, Lucille Ball was left alone with something she never anticipated: silence. For decades, her life had been a whirlwind of scripts, studio lots, red carpets, and roaring laughter. Then almost overnight, it all slowed. And Lucy, once America's brightest star, was no longer being watched. She tried to stay busy. After I Love Lucy, she launched The Lucy Show, and later here's Lucy, each time playing some version of her former self. But the magic was fading. Audiences still loved her, but the spark she once brought to the screen felt dimmer. Critics started calling her routines dated. Newcomers in comedy were rising, and for the first time in her life, Lucille felt irrelevant. And she couldn't stand it. Friends noticed the change. She became withdrawn, irritable. She'd lash out over small things, props out of place, a missed cue, even the color of costume. It wasn't just about control anymore. It was about holding on. Lucille had built an empire with her own 2 hands, and now it felt like it was crumbling underneath her. In 1985, she attempted a small-screen comeback with a new sitcom, Life with Lucy. It was a disaster. Audiences didn't connect. The jokes fell flat. It was canceled after just 8 episodes. The failure crushed her. One close friend said Lucy took it as a personal rejection. She thought people were done laughing at her. She felt forgotten. It wasn't just the career decline that broke her spirit. It was what came with it, the end of relevance. The woman who had once commanded entire studios now sat alone in her Beverly Hills home, surrounded by awards that suddenly felt meaningless. The phones rang less. The scripts stopped arriving. And Lucille, who had given her entire life to entertaining others, didn't know what to do when the applause stopped. She stopped going out, stopped attending events, even stopped taking calls from old colleagues. One biographer described her final years as quietly devastating. She would rewatch old episodes of I Love Lucy, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. Her housekeeper later admitted she'd sit there, alone, watching herself laugh on screen. It was like she missed the person she used to be. The loneliness crept in deep. Her children were grown, her health was declining, and the industry she once ruled had moved on without her. And though she remained a legend to the world, Lucille Ball spent her final years wrestling with a haunting question no one expected from someone so iconic. What do you do when the world stops watching? In one of her last interviews, when asked what she wished people understood about her, Lucy said quietly that I worked hard, that I didn't want to be forgotten, that I never stopped loving the laughter.